Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining our case-based discussion webinar today. My name is Rachel Heatley, and I'm Senior Research and Policy Officer at the GEOSC, and I'm deputising for my colleague, Dr. Stacey Cliff, today. So on to the kind of meat of today's presentation. What is a case-based discussion? What does it entail? How does it fit into the CPD scheme? I'm also going to be covering how you can go about planning your case-based discussion so that you can get the most out of it that you possibly can. Giving and receiving constructive feedback. This is something that osteopaths have told us they're a bit anxious about, they feel a bit vulnerable. So I'm going to be going through some hints and tips to kind of engage with that process and get the most out of it as possible. Of course, you need to record and reflect on any CPD activity you undertake. So I'll be showing you some useful resources and examples of how you can record, reflect on your case-based discussion, and then link it to the Osteopathic Practice Standards. And lastly, I know this wasn't advertised, but I'm including a short introduction to peer discussion review, because if you manage to complete your case-based discussion, you'll actually then be able to complete a part of your peer discussion review. And so I just kind of want to take you through that journey. All right. I also kind of want to set this webinar and this game in context. The rationale behind it is that we are trying to shift the emphasis of CPD towards community, support and engagement. Having worked with osteopaths over the last 2 years now, I know that osteopaths like opportunities to talk shop, and our aim is that as a result of the scheme, you will have more opportunities to do that. You'll have more opportunities to get support and to get different perspectives on your practice. So that's the rationale behind it. So I'm just going to set case-based discussion in the context of the scheme now. So there are 4 standards that you need to meet as part of the scheme. And the first one is undertaking CPD in the 4 themes of the Osteopathic Practice Standards. Often, a lot of CPD historically has been undertaken in knowledge, skills and performance, but you need to undertake CPD that reflects also A, C and D, and equally CPD that reflects the breadth of your practice. So for example, if you're an osteopath who undertakes 1 day a week in education, you should undertake an appropriate portion of your CPD in the area of education and teaching practice. All right. So objective activity. Case-based discussion is an objective activity. You need to complete at least 1 objective activity in your 3-year cycle. You can choose to do more. Some of the other options are patient feedback, PROMS, which stands for patient reported outcome measures, peer observation and clinical audit. The rationale behind doing an objective activity is that self-assessment can be unreliable and it is better informed by external feedback, okay? And then communication and consent. Every 3 years you need to undertake a CPD activity in communication and consent. We get a lot of questions about communication and consent, and we actually have a dedicated workbook to give you ideas about the type of activities that can cover. Also, depending on the case-based discussion you choose, if it's very much focused on theme A, communication and patient partnership, and addresses issues like obtaining consent, then actually you could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You could meet your objective activity requirement and your communication and consent. The reason we have chosen to focus on communication and consent is that this is an area that has high in reported concerns from patients. And doing an activity in this area will help you demonstrate how your CPD benefits patients. And then, as always, you'll need to maintain an annual CPD portfolio with documented evidence. You need to record and reflect on your CPD. And then lastly, a new element of the scheme, peer discussion review, and that needs to be completed and signed off towards the end of your 3-year cycle. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation. So what is case-based discussion? As I've said, it's an example of an objective activity. If you complete a case-based discussion, you will have met your objective activity requirement pending recording and reflecting on it. It is a way of getting external feedback from a colleague. It provides you an opportunity to reflect on what you do and consider how you might enhance your practice. In a positive way for you also, it could be that you discuss a difficult case, one that's maybe kept you up at night, and you find through your discussion with a colleague reassurance that you have in fact acted appropriately. And we're aware that lots of osteopaths are already doing case-based discussions on an informal basis, but having a structured conversation with a colleague or another health professional, because if you work in a multidisciplinary practice, more than able to discuss your case with a physio or a chiropractor, as long as they're a registered health professional. So if you undertake this in a more structured way, it really supports the development of new insights and learning for you. Before you kind of jump into doing a case-based discussion, in order to get as much out of it as possible, there are a few things to consider. So you need to consider who do you want to discuss your case with, what case or perhaps cases do you want to discuss so that you'll get the most out of it, where you might want to meet, and how long you're going to meet for. So just to give you that time to book it out in your diary, you don't feel pressured, and that you can really get to the nitty-gritty of what it is you want to get out of the case-based discussion. And it could be, if you're working with a colleague, you both want to complete your objective activity, or you're both going to bring cases at that point as well. And if there's anything you need to prepare. So planning your case-based discussion. As I said, the choice is absolutely yours. It could be someone that you know well. That's the person you choose who discuss your case with, or it might be someone that you know less well. You might want to discuss it a one-to-one, or you might want to discuss it in a group setting. However, what this is all underpinned by, and what this slide is about, this is what osteopaths have told us are the most important factors to ensure that it is a positive experience for both parties or all parties. So being comfortable with the other person and the process, and feeling safe, because it can be vulnerable. You can feel vulnerable receiving feedback and worried about how you're going to react. So it's important to find someone you trust. People often trust their peers then to give helpful feedback on the questions you raise and maybe the doubts and uncertainties that you've experienced. And it's really important to create an environment where uncertainty and mistakes are viewed by everyone as an opportunity for learning and development. Obviously, meeting face-to-face has become increasingly difficult as a result of the pandemic, even with things easing up. The reassuring thing, hopefully, for your CPD is that you don't need to meet face-to-face. If that's difficult for you, case-based discussions can be done online, via Zoom. They can be done over the phone, other online platforms, and perhaps if you are a sole practitioner and don't work with any osteopaths close by you, you may want to actually work with an osteopath that you studied with. So there's no definitive rules, it's what suits you best. So I mentioned earlier, we're going to do some polls, and so I'm going to launch the first poll. Bear with me, hopefully technology will be kind to me. So I'm going to launch the poll, and the question is, who do you think you'll conduct your case-based discussion with? All right, so there's 5 options there, and just let me know who you think you're going to work with. Oh, this is great. With high levels of engagement, I'm really pleased. Thank you for participating. Yeah, I can see lots of answers coming in now. Just bear with me a moment. Yep, I think that seems to be, oh, everybody's participating, that's good. Right, okay, I'm going to close the poll now, and then I'm going to share the answers with everybody. So hopefully you can see that. So most people are choosing to do a case-based discussion with somebody that they work with. And only a small amount are going to do that with another registered health professional. Okay, that's reassuring. Well, not reassuring, it's up to you, but it's good for us to kind of better understand how you're going to undertake the process. So choosing a case, I've just said Useful to discuss a case that has affected you in some way, raising questions or uncertainties in your mind. It could have been particularly challenging from a clinical perspective. Perhaps you felt that you acted outside of your comfort zone. Or this is one of the ways to kill two birds with one stone. It could have been a particular issue that cropped up, effective communication or gaining consent. If your case-based discussion focuses on those sort of topics, then it can often meet the communication and consent requirement of the CPD scheme. The whole idea behind case-based discussions is that they can often lead to reassurance and that sharing of ideas, things you hadn't thought about to help you enhance your practice. So what needs to be front of mind when discussing cases? And I know this probably seems, of course we do this, but it's just worth keeping that in front of your, in top of your mind. You should agree beforehand that the case is going to be confidential. You know, set the ground rules before you even discuss the case. You should ensure that patients remain anonymous and that their confidentiality is preserved at all times. Even if you don't mention a patient's name, there could be some other identifying factors. And that's an issue, particularly if you work in a small community. And as somebody who comes from a small town, where everybody knows everybody, it would be easy to identify somebody by certain factors. Okay, so it's worth reminding. I just wanted to remind you of that. So, giving and receiving feedback. Some of you might be very used to this process. Others who perhaps work in a more isolated setting or less familiar and may find it potentially daunting. So I want to set it in a positive context about the purpose of it, how to create the right environment, how to give effective feedback, and how to kind of receive that feedback. The rationale behind these slides is that we have had some osteopaths who have taken part in our smaller scale webinars say that this is part of the scheme they're very worried about, and thinking about these skills and testing them out in case-based discussion, those skills can then also be applied within your peer discussion review. So that's another reason why I'm going to include some slides on peer discussion review. So we've had, as I said, some feedback from osteopaths with regards to the recent CPD evaluation survey. If you feel that you're not sure how to do this, if you're worried that you might take it as criticism, if you're worried you might not agree with the feedback, you're not on your own. Other osteopaths feel this way, and that's why I'm going to give you some hints and tips to ensure that you feel safe and positive and confident going through the process. So the purpose of feedback. The aim is the feedback is for the recipient. The feedback is for you and to motivate you and to help you develop your knowledge, your skills, and perhaps adapt your behaviours to enhance your practice. It's to support and develop critical evaluation of your own and others' performance, and to help you self-monitor and maintain that kind of professional autonomy. Now, as I said, what's important to you? What's important to osteopaths? They've told us it's about being comfortable. The word trust comes up again and again. Trust in your peer to give you that critical feedback and know that uncertainty and mistakes are viewed by both or all parties as an opportunity for learning and development and feeling safe. So before you kind of undertake a case-based discussion, think about what the ground rules will be for that session. You know, myself and a colleague, what my colleague might need and what I might need could be two different things. So it's better to kind of flesh that out beforehand. What do you want to get out of the case-based discussion? Are there particular questions you want to address? Are there particular issues you want to share and get feedback on? How are you going to present your practice? Say you are discussing a case with somebody who is less well known to you. How do you want to give them that context in which you operate? How will you record and capture your feedback and actions? So it's good to agree on this beforehand. Now, I'm going to launch a new poll. Bear with me one moment. I have two screens here, I'm very fancy, in case you're wondering why I'm looking away. So I've launched the poll. We're keen to understand what is most important for you in creating the right environment. So I can see some answers coming through about what you feel will help you get the most out of your case-based discussion. I'll say again, thank you so much for kind of this level of interaction. We're piloting everything and wanting to get immediate feedback from you so that we can then take immediate action on anything that if we need to create an additional resource or tweak things that we're doing. So thank you very much. So I'm going to close that poll now, and then I'm going to share the results. So, interesting discussion viewed as an opportunity for learning. That's actually different to some of the other webinars that we have participated in or we've led. So that's really good to know. Okay, discussion views as an opportunity for learning. So maybe, you know, in our communication with the wider profession, we're going to reflect that then. So, oh, that's great. Thank you. And Stacey, don't worry. I'm going to close the poll now or hide it. So the slides should have reappeared. Yep. Right, giving effective feedback. The crux of giving effective feedback are to ask open questions. Asking open questions as opposed to closed ones where the answer will be yes or no gives the osteopath that you are giving constructive feedback to an opportunity to reflect on what went well, what didn't go well, and why. So I'm going to contradict myself. The first question is closed, but if you ask a closed question, it's good to follow up with an open one. So did the consultation go as planned? Realistically, if somebody is bringing a case to discuss, it didn't go the way that they wanted. So the answer is likely to be no. And if not, why not? And then give them space to kind of explain what's gone on, you know, to talk it out with you. Here's a list of, you know, good questions. If you were doing it again, would you do the same next time? And what would you do differently? And that's where the reassurance angle comes in. Lots of osteopaths, as part of their case-based discussions, it's something they've been worried about, but actually they probably did it as well as they possibly could do. The treatment perhaps was excellent, and maybe it's just a tweak of a certain behavior or a certain process. And osteopaths who work as sole practitioners often don't get that chance to get external feedback, and that's the whole thinking behind this. So how did you feel during the consultation? A great question to ask is, how do you think the patient felt? Help your colleague put themselves in the shoes of the patient. And then ultimately, what did you learn from this consultation? Now, if you use these questions, I really believe that that will give structure to your discussion and that you will learn from it and get the most out of it. Right? So some tips. This sounds you're probably rolling your eyes, but it is worth, I have seen some case-based discussions where maybe it hasn't gone as well. And one of the things to remember is give feedback only when you're asked to do so, and then when your offer is accepted. So may I offer you a few suggestions on this case? You've asked the questions, the osteopath has given you, your colleague has given answers on the case, you've discussed it, and then that's the opportunity to say, okay, well, that's been a really interesting discussion. What you said, can I give you a few ideas about what I think went well, what didn't go well? Again, consider the emotional needs of the recipient. You may be very used to getting feedback, but the osteopath you're talking to may not be and may be feeling vulnerable. It is important to focus on behaviors that can be changed, not personality traits. You're going to hear me use the word specific over the next few slides. In order for feedback to be effective, it needs to be specific. Give examples where you can, and remember, feedback is for the recipient, not the giver. Again, be sensitive to the impact of your message. Right. So maybe if somebody's feeling vulnerable, or even just, it's a lengthy discussion, don't then overload the person with feedback. 2, maximum 3 key messages at the end kind of summarize, well, here's what I thought. When you said this, I thought that. So give your colleague a chance to respond and to reflect. Don't jump in with a follow-up question. Again, try to be specific. Use I statements and give your experience of the behavior. And when you're giving feedback of a scenario that hasn't gone well, suggest alternatives. Just don't kind of give this feedback and not follow it up. And practical things that your colleague can action. And this is a good rule in life generally. I think personally, start with something positive. This will help put the person at ease, help the person to feel that trust, that bond of trust, and help them to learn in a way that is right for them. So if feedback is going well, this is what it'll look like. It will encourage self-assessment and self-problem solving first. If you ask a question and give somebody the space to reflect on it and think of their answer, it's better for a person to solve that problem themselves rather than you giving a particular solution, because what's right for you might not be right for them. Using descriptive feedback will always be a positive way to approach it. Feedback that's balanced, what went well, what didn't go well, and what could you do differently. Suggesting alternatives is also positive. If there has been an instance, say the case that your colleagues bringing to you is one in which there has been a breakdown in communication with their patient, if they were to experience that scenario again, what would they do? And a good way to kind of get yourself and your colleague into the right frame of mind is perhaps role play through what they do next time. Being supportive again, and then at the end, give a bit of structure to the conversation, summarize what has been learned. There are lots of coaching models out there. There are lots of useful resources on giving feedback and how to do it in a really exemplary way. There is no onus on you to read these articles and blogs and resources. However, if you're feeling nervous about the prospect, they're really worth a read. Everything that you're doing in preparation for your case-based discussion counts as CPD activity if you record it and you reflect on it. What did you learn from reading this blog? How are you going to approach your case-based discussion differently? So we have the two links there, but I've also got a list of useful resources at the end, and I'm going to send you the links to those in case that's of interest to you and you want to explore it. So how does it feel to receive feedback? Well, I'm going to be asking you to complete a survey after the webinar, and I'm nervous about the prospect of receiving feedback. So, but what I promise to do is to listen to it, try not to be defensive. If there's something I can do to improve, well, that's going to benefit me, but ultimately it's going to benefit you too. Ask for it to be repeated if needed. Sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming. It's fine to kind of say, whoa, 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 what did you say there? What did you mean? Come from the viewpoint that it's constructive. Everything is a learning opportunity. Always try and pause and think before responding. Ask for examples. Examples often make feedback much more effective. And try to accept it positively for consideration rather than dismissing it because of trying to protect yourself. Ask for suggestions for modifying behaviour and respect and thank your colleagues. So I am respectful of your opinion, and I am thankful that you're choosing to participate in the polls and also hopefully participate in the survey afterwards. Now, some barriers to effective feedback. You don't want to upset the other person. That is completely understandable. And that's why it's good to be sensitive when you are giving your reflections on the case. You're maybe afraid of doing more harm than good. If you approach it in a constructive, open way, that is very unlikely to happen. If you're supportive and respectful, it will be a good kind of positive process. Now, when you're receiving that feedback, being defensive is really not going to be beneficial to you. I know that this is, you're probably thinking, oh, rolling your eyes, but it's worth reminding you of these things. And just these are some tips. Again, feedback being generalized is a barrier to effective feedback. Relate it to specific facts and observations. If there's no guidance on how to rectify behavior, that can leave somebody feeling confused and unsure. If you're receiving feedback and you're not respectful of the source, that will be ineffective. And look out for body language. If somebody's tense, picking up on non-verbal cues will also be helpful. Now, if this all sounds overly formal and intimidating, please don't worry. Remember that this is centered around a case-based discussion, and in many ways it will be a two-way activity. If you both choose, if you choose an osteopath who is undertaking a case-based discussion in order to meet their own objective activity requirement, it's going to be the case that you'll both be given and receiving feedback at some point. So it will be an organic process. Now, if you are really still feeling unsure, one of the things that we have produced is a case study. It's called the Mrs. Taylor case study, and you could use this example case study to practice your case-based discussion, to get you familiar with giving and receiving feedback and reflecting on practice. So the case study, just to give you a little bit of context, it's about Luke, who's an osteopath who's been successfully treating a 64-year-old woman, Mrs. Taylor, for a knee problem. They've known each other prior to Mrs. Taylor becoming Luke's patient. And what the case study does is it kind of gives you the background, it gives you what's happened in the consultation, and then what happens afterwards. And it's useful in helping you to apply the concepts of giving and receiving feedback in a case study scenario. And then we've also produced these questions that if you could role play it, questions to ask Luke: what happened? What are you worried about? And then if you pretend that you're Luke, what do I think I did well? How could I make a change? What would I do differently next time? So just to help you familiarize yourself with the process. In our smaller scale webinars, osteopaths who have undertaken a case-based discussion have tried this out first. They've maybe done it for 15 minutes, half an hour, but it's good to kind of get those open questions and to try it out, and that you're not discussing your own case. So, it's a suggestion. I'll be sharing the slides so you'll get a sense of whether you want to try that or not. So you will also, I'm going to pause for a glass of water, bear with me. So you'll also need to think about how you're going to record and structure your reflections. Do decide in advance how you prefer to do this. Is it during or following the case-based discussion? Remember that keeping records of your discussion will allow you to count the activity towards your CPD requirement. And we have two templates that we've prepared that you may want to use. Now, feel free to adapt them for your needs, or if you are very much kind of used to giving and receiving feedback, or you've developed your own way of recording it, absolutely do that. This is just a choice of just an option we wanted to give you. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, how much information do I need to record? I will say, don't feel you need to record pages of information. It is the process that should be the focus, about what skills you've developed and how you've reflected and enhanced your practice. So you just need to record sufficient information to allow you to give a brief summary of the key points, the key impact that undertaking a case-based discussion had, and any learning you've gleaned from the process, and anything you anything you're thinking about doing as a result. So we've got two templates. This first one, I'm aware that the screen is very small. All I'll say is, with this one, it's about linking your case-based discussion to the OPS. And if people are very familiar with the OPS or have been using it regularly to record their CPD on an ongoing basis, this might be a template that you want to use. Both the templates are available for download via this link, and that's on our CPD site, which is a whole host of resources. So that's template 1. Template 2 actually is just a one that I prefer. I'm somebody who, whenever I'm doing a performance review with kind of my manager, I like to jot notes down because I have a terrible memory, and I also like to identify learning points as I go along. You may do things differently, but with this template, it's very much focused on a sort of what, so what now model of reflection. So what went well in the case, what went less well, what would you do differently next time, and what themes of the OPS did you discuss? If you're still unsure, we have produced a completed example. This is an anonymized case study from an osteopath who shared what they had done. What I will say is this osteopath did write a lot of text. Some people prefer to do that, others just want to kind of jot down bullet points, but it's worth having a read through this to familiarize yourself and to think about, oh, actually, this is how I want to record it. Here's the template that I want to use, or to help you adapt the template in a way that suits you best. So, recording your case-based discussion, you'll also need to link it to the Osteopathic Practice Standards. And a way to kind of, this is a quick frame of reference for that whenever you're recording your case-based discussion. If your case has included areas like listening, consent, it will cover theme A. If it has covered working within your competence, keeping up to date with your skills, then it will cover theme B. If it has covered history taking, examination, treatment, it'll cover theme C, safety and quality in practice. And if you touch on issues in your discussion about candor, integrity, ethics, honesty, then it will touch on professionalism. And remember, if your case-based discussion focuses heavily on theme A, then it is likely to meet the communication and consent requirement. But what we've seen a lot of is that a lot of cases actually touch on all themes. So I've gone a little bit deeper into examples. If your case focused on the process of obtaining consent and continuing consent, if it involved discussing how you picked up or didn't pick up non-verbal cues, it could have focused on working within the limits of your competence. If it involved being aware of a wider role as a health professional, for example, maybe difficulties you had in engaging with the GP to refer your patient on for an MRI scan, you know, or perhaps it was that working with other, in tandem with other health professionals worked well, and how you're going to formalize this process as part of your ongoing learning. And then lastly, about maintaining appropriate boundaries with individual patients. So we've given these as an example to help you identify what themes of the OPS you covered in your case-based discussion. Right, so your case-based discussion, we have a dedicated workbook that takes you through this process step by step. It includes all the resources and just fleshes out a lot of what I've discussed today. That is the link in which you can access the information, and I would recommend having a look through it. It isn't long, but it is useful, and it is part of just one suite of a whole range of resources that we have. And again, you know, the time that you spend in preparing for your case-based discussion will ensure that you get as much out of it as possible, and that will be of most benefit to you and to your colleague. So I said there were going to be some useful resources as well. So we, you know, this is not, we're not endorsing these blogs or articles. I just include them here as a reference that you may want to read to have a run through of it and get some ideas about how you'd like to approach your case-based discussion. So I'm also then going to show you, so this could be a massive technical feat, but I'm going to try it anyway. Why not be ambitious? I'm going to show you our peer discussion review animation. The reason that I'm doing that is that we know lots of osteopaths are coming up to year 3. Maybe they're embarking on doing an objective activity. And some osteopaths that I've spoken to in recently are conflating case-based discussion with peer discussion review. So I just wanted to make it really clear within this webinar the difference between the two, but also to say that if you undertake and complete your case-based discussion, it means you can actually complete and get signed off a part of your peer discussion review template. So this is kind of the through process. So I'm going to play it. I have my fingers crossed that it's going to work. I'm not sure, but let's wait and see. So fingers crossed. Let's see. Really thrilled that that worked. I wasn't sure, so you've no idea of how much I was quite nervous about that. So hopefully that's helpful and putting the kind of peer discussion review in more context. By kind of focusing on your giving and receiving feedback skills, it is going to help you make the peer discussion review much easier. Now, to try and understand where you are in the peer discussion review process, I just want to launch, you'll be glad to hear, our final poll. So bear with me. And the question is, have you identified a peer for your peer discussion review? So the poll is now open. And I'm going to hopefully say to you, if you haven't identified a peer yet, don't worry. We have a whole host of resources to kind of get you started and get you thinking about how to undertake this process. All right, I think that's everybody. Okay, so I'm going to close it and then I'm going to share the results. So hopefully, okay, so 70% have chosen a peer and 30% haven't. As I said, the resources that we have produced are available. You've got the link there. So we have the animation, maybe worth kind of sharing it with colleagues. We did, my colleague Stacey Clift did a really good webinar. I don't say that lightly. She really did. We got very positive feedback on it, and it's a step-by-step process that takes you through PDR. We've got very detailed guidance, and the things that the thing that we know is helping osteopaths the most, because they've told us, are we've got some completed PDR templates. So they're there, and actually, if I have time, I'm going to take you through one and what it would look like if you completed your case-based discussion, and how you would then input that into the peer discussion review template. So just to kind of recap, hold on, I know I need to close the book. What I want to say is, just to recap, what is a peer discussion review? It's a supportive process to help osteopaths learn from each other. It is a structured, formal discussion with a peer that you choose. So it's up to you who you want to work with. During your PDR, you discuss your CPD and how it has impacted your practice. So it isn't about going through every single CP activity. It's more of a reflection on, okay, my CPD cycle over the 3 years, here's what I learned. I tried case-based discussion as part of my CPD cycle this time around. Actually, I feel a lot more confident about that. What I might try next time is peer observation, and you might say, why? So that's really more about what kind of the PDR process is. It's more of a general kind of overview about what's gone well, what hasn't got well, what you've learned, and what you're going to do differently in your next cycle. And then you can have one or more peers throughout the process, or even carry it out the PDR within a group setting, say, for example, in your regional CPD group. If you have chosen somebody to do your case-based discussion with, you are not, you don't have to have that same person to do your peer discussion review with, but you can. If that's easy and you've built up that rapport and trust, well, then that would be ideal. So, dispelling the myths, it is not a test. There is no pass and fail. It is not a peer observation. If somebody said to you, will you be my peer reviewer? You don't need to go and observe them in practice. You are not expected as a peer reviewer to validate an osteopath's entire CPD record. And again, we know that a lot of osteopaths conflate the two things. Case-based discussion is an objective activity, not a peer discussion review. And you're probably thinking, well, you know, I know that, but there have been several instances in which people had signed up to the peer discussion review session and thought it was actually going to be a case-based discussion. So we want to just be as clear and reassuring and kind of informative as possible. So why do you need to complete one? Well, it enables a peer to confirm that you've completed the CPD elements, the requirements I mentioned, range of practice, objective activity, communication and consent, and keeping a record of your CPD. So it's worth noting, you no longer need to submit a CPD annual summary form, and rather than submitting full details to the GIOSC every year, your CPD record will help you carry out your peer discussion review. So if you use the CPD online diary, for example, there's a functionality on it where you could actually email your CPD record to your peer reviewer, and they can scan through it. It's not about reading everything, but they can scan through it and say, oh, you know, you undertook a CPD activity on urological conditions at the UCO. I mean, I'm making this up entirely, but and that covered all 4 themes. That's really interesting. How did you find that? Was it good? What did you learn? Would you do it again? You know, it's about just being able to scan through. So that's a useful way to do it. And then, when should it take place? Well, it needs to be completed and signed off towards the end of your 3-year cycle. It's good to have an idea of who your peer will be and have that initial conversation. You could do a practice PDR, that's perfectly fine. In fact, I would encourage you to do that to get you familiar with the template. And as I said, if you undertake a case-based discussion and you complete it, you could then complete standard 2 of the PDR template. So I'm actually just going to really briefly, because I'm conscious of the time, I don't want to keep you late. So bear with me and see if I can show it to you. So this is the template. It's the peer discussion review guidance and template, and it's example 1. And it looks like the document looks really, really long, but the amount of text that you have to input is actually not that much. So, so I'll show you now. So the blue is for the osteopath, the orange sections are for the peer. So these are a group of osteopaths who, the 3 who did the peer discussion review together. They did it face-to-face because they work in the same practice. Now, I am aware that I'm flying through this, but I'm doing that because I want you to get the most out of it, and you can read it in your own time. Basically, you write a short bit of blurb about your practice, how many osteopaths you see, what type of practice you engage in. Standard 1, this is, this osteopath wrote 3 paragraphs on their practice. They picked out 2 examples of CPD that they undertook and what sort of themes. And what the peer says, did the osteopath complete CPD activities in relation to 4 themes of the OPS? Yes, they did. And this is what their peer said. But most importantly, I want to focus on standard 2. Standard 2 is met by the osteopath showing clearly that external feedback has been gathered, analysed, and has informed their practice. So if you do a case-based discussion and record it and reflect on it, then this is what it could look like. So this is actually longer than we would even expect. This person osteopath has given an overview of their case, kind of the background to it, and how they went about the broader process of the case-based discussion. It isn't about the minutiae of the discussion, it's more about the process. So that's what this osteopath did, and explained what template they used. And I've said, this particular case was on about consent. And as a result of the discussion, this osteopath is going to do some more reading on communication and consent, a group discussion, and they tend to explore some articles on the topic, and their case covered themes A, C, and D. And then what the peer does is say, yes, the osteopath has completed it, gives a short reflection on it, and then they say, have they done the objective activity? They've done case-based discussion. And have they done these elements of it? Have they said why they chose case-based discussion? Did they talk about the outcome of the case? Did they talk about the conclusion, what the reflection was? And did they kind of think about what actions they were going to undertake? If you complete that section and at the end get it signed off, that is that element of CPD signed off. Okay, so I'm aware of the time. I just wanted to say to you, I know we're going to have I think some questions have come through. These are the resources available, and I just want to say thank you for your time, and I'm going to open it up to questions now.